Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
I am exhausted. The kids are off school. There's 6 to 8 inches of snow today. And
this is a snow day or a winter break?
Well, they can't. They normally go to school physically. They can't today. But of course, to make it extra complicated, there's still homework and schoolwork to be done. But of course, I have a whole day's worth of work, and so does my wife, because this wasn't supposed to be a day off. So, and you're getting me now. Normally, you get me fresh, Bill, first thing in the morning.
Yeah, you're always terrible in the afternoon.
Well, I've written a column today. I've already I've taped another podcast today. You're not getting Matt Lewis's. We're not sending our best right now on this.
Well, we have winter break this week, which is a cruel joke. And we have a friend over there. We're having an indoor mass.
You should go to Cancun. If there's a break,
is that right?
Just go to Cancun. That's what.
I hear it's lovely this time of year. But instead of Cancun, I'm on my back porch, freezing cold as the snow comes down. It's either that or wearing a mask for the show. So I thought you should see my face, for better or for worse.
Well, you're looking great as always, and I dig the hat. I think you're ready to go door to door campaigning for Howard Dean in Iowa.
It's a red hat, not an orange hat. All these hats, all these winter hats. I don't know. There's always this point at the top of these hats. I don't know how you get the hat down so it actually is the shape of your head. I've never successfully done that.
You just did it, and I think it looked better the other way.
But it's gonna come up. It's gonna come up again.
That's a reservoir tip. I'm not sure what it's for. I think it just makes you look taller, but you're already pretty tall, so.
So I gotta say about Ted Cruz in Cancun. So I saw the photos on Twitter yesterday, and my gut reaction was, this can't be right. This is some photo from 2 years ago that's getting circulated, and it's probably a prank. Because who would possibly do that in the middle of a massive crisis in your home state? But lo and behold, apparently it is for real.
Right. Well, I'm sure in the annals of Blogging Heads episodes, we've done one about which mayor of New York lost because he didn't get the plows didn't plow the snow right, or he went out of town. I mean, this is not a new thing, but in a way, you could understand Trump thinking that the old rules about. The old rules about things like parochial leadership and, when there's a fire. Chris Matthews used to say, when there's a big fire in your neighborhood, you want to see the mayor standing next to the police chief and on the curb outside the apartment building on fire. The mayor can't do anything, but you want him there. That's part of the job. But you could understand why Cruz might think that those rules no longer apply.
I don't think Cruz believes that. I think this is evidence that Cruz couldn't give an F. That he's not planning to run again. He's not planning to run for president again.
What?
That I got tickets to Cancun, and screw you all. I'm going to Cancun.
Second. Ted Cruz has been running for president his whole life. He is so ambitious. Why would you think that he has decided that this is over?
Because he is currently in Cancun. That is why I think that.
Wait, but that goes against everything we know about ambitious Ted Cruz. Isn't a more plausible scenario my theory?
Well, I mean,
or he just didn't think he would get caught. Maybe.
How could he's flying commercial? How is he not going to get caught?
When did he leave? Do we know when he departed?
I think it was yesterday.
Okay, that's bad. That's super bad.
Apparently he tweeted after he landed about the storm.
Okay. I am perplexed. I can't believe that he has decided that he still thinks he's going to be president, Bill. I'm sure of it. I'm sure.
I think it is possible that he has enough rationality to know that he is not going to be president. That either Donald Trump is going to run, and then that he would never beat Donald Trump in a primary, or Donald Trump does not run, and just nobody likes Ted Cruz, and so he's not going to win a primary.
Okay, but wouldn't the same awareness that has liberated him to go to the beach have also liberated him to quit being a jerk? Like, wouldn't he have
He's
voted?
always been a jerk. That's not
okay,
new.
but wouldn't he have been? But wouldn't he have been a more courageous jerk?
Why?
Because he doesn't have to run for office in Texas again.
But he still wants to be a conservative in good standing, I assume. Even if he wasn't in office, he might want to have be a pundit or have a podcast or work in a Republican lobbying firm or whatever. And this is why most Republicans, even when they check out, don't go totally rogue.
That is a fair point. All the guys who are retiring that you thought might be liberated to do the right thing, few of them did the right thing. So that is a good point. I still don't think you're right, but I also don't actually know. Maybe he's just stupid. But he's done, clever things before. So I don't. He's obviously has a high IQ. I don't know, man. It's weird.
I don't know if you remember.
I think my theory is more plausible than yours. I'll say that.
I don't know if you remember December 2002 when Al Gore hosted Saturday Night Live. This is, about 2 years after Bush v. Gore. And a lot of people thought he had the inside track to get the nomination again and try to, get justice for what happened. He goes on SNL and he does an opening monologue where they spoof The Bachelor, reminiscing about when he picked his running mate between Lieberman, Kerry, and Edwards. And he's in a hot tub with one of the actors playing Joe Lieberman, and they're, wearing their underwear in the hot tub, and holding champagne glasses. They both say lockbox at the same time, and they curl their arms around each other. And, I didn't make the conclusion in the moment, but it was actually a couple of days after that when he said, I'm not running. And they're smarter.
Well, Al Gore also grew a beard.
But he shaved it by then.
But the beard, that's like the version of Hillary hiking. You know what I'm saying? Like the beard is what we call a tell. It's like me with the hair, Bill. I've checked out. I mean, I'm not going to be, at some point, you let nature run its course, and, well, look at you, for example. You're sitting out, Bill, you're a grown man on your porch, taping a podcast in the cold. We've been humble.
Well, I'm not going to be president either, but at this point, Gore had been doing some things to suggest he would be running. He shaved the beard. He'd made some appearances. He was entering into the political arena, but then...
When Britney Spears shaved her head, the beard is the same thing, other direction.
I think Gore in the hot tub was the clear sign he was not doing this again. And, Cruz in Cancun is the sign that Ted Cruz is not doing this again.
Interesting. Okay, let me throw this theory at you. You know how, remember how when, Ted Kennedy did that interview where he couldn't say why he was running for president?
Yes.
So there's a theory that he subconsciously sabotaged himself. He didn't do it knowingly, but that Ted Kennedy didn't really want to be president. He just knew that everybody expected him to be, right? He was the last Kennedy left. I mean, his two brothers had both been assassinated. So there was pressure on him to do something he didn't really want to do, and that he subconsciously sabotaged himself. That's a theory. Now, maybe that's what Ted Cruz is doing here. He's not really checking out. But the fact that he would make such a boneheaded mistake, it's why criminals sometimes want to get caught. What do you think of that?
I don't know if it's subconscious. I I also don't think Ted Kennedy was subconscious. Ted Kennedy took it pretty far in 1980. He took it all the way to the convention. I don't think he was.
Was he running because he really wanted to be president, or did he think he was supposed to want to be president?
I think you take on the incumbent president in your own party. You run ads basically accusing him of being the next Herbert Hoover. You try to change the convention rules to snatch the nomination away from him, even though he has the most delegates. You get your friend John Anderson to say, I want one third party so long as you give Ted Kennedy the nomination. A lot happened to really, really, really try to get that nomination.
I feel like you're just shitting on my points here. I feel like we lately in the past few years have been getting we agreed on a lot, and I think you're just contentious to that. Is this for ratings? Are we trying to boost our Q rating here or something?
Well, one thing that I think we kind of surprisingly agree on is the legacy of Rush Limbaugh.
Yes. Well, it's hard to dispute. You wrote a piece first, and you helped shape my thinking, which often happens on the DMZ. But in this case, I read your piece at Washington Monthly, and it helped shape my thinking. And I did this sort of personal inventory of my life as a ditto head, starting in 1988. But I concluded it with the great Ronald Reagan question, which is, are you better off now? In this case, I said, is the Republican Party better off now than it was in 1988 when Rush Limbaugh started? And I think the answer to that's pretty obvious. and it's hard. And again, Rush Limbaugh is clearly not the only data point between 1988 and 2020. There are a lot of things that happened, a lot of big things like 9/11. But you'd be hard pressed to find someone who was a more significant voice in conservatism during that era. He's certainly on a short list, and so
arguably ever.
Yeah.
I mean, what conservative has had as big an audience for as long a period of time as Rush Limbaugh?
Well, I'm not going to argue with myself because my point is, on his watch, we are not better off.
Right.
Than we
That's
were.
right. And this is someone who he didn't just style himself as a mere entertainer. I mean, sometimes people leaned on that to justify certain offensive comments. I mean, he branded his show as the Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. He was articulating on a daily basis for 32 years what conservatism means and why you should make it a organizing point for your worldview. And as I argued in my piece, in January 2016, and this is when Trump was on the rise, and it was a couple weeks before Iowa, and Trump's dominance of the primary to date was causing a lot of introspection amongst conservatives because plenty of conservatives did not trust him. And even Rush wasn't all the way there yet. But Rush seemed to have a good feel of what was happening on the ground and what was happening within his own audience, and said the glue, I'm not quoting verbatim here, but I have the full quote of my piece, the glue that binds conservatism is not conservatism. It's virulent opposition to the left and the Democrat Party, he said Democrat Party, and Barack Obama. So he was admitting that through all of his years talking about conservatism, ostensibly, that wasn't what kept his audience together. In fact, Rush, of course, was not exactly a font of intellectual ideas. He was far more of a slasher and a polarizer, and that's what his audience liked, and that's what drove the party to Trump at the end of the day. So he had a great influence on the party, but it was influence in the negative because conservatism is left in a far weaker state at the end of the Trump presidency, at the end of Rush's career and life.
I think that's right. I would add just a couple things. One, as I write and sort of, document to a certain degree, Rush changed over time too. The world changed, I changed, but Rush changed. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Rush was more optimistic, more positive, Hey. He was, I mean, when I started listening to Rush Limbaugh, he was like a 38-year-old dude living in New York City who was pretty tech savvy and was going out to dinner with Maureen Dowd. He was a different guy than he ended up. And it also makes sense that he would have been more optimistic and positive at the time. I mean, he was sort of running on the fumes of the Reagan era. Ronald Reagan had this sunny optimism, and Limbaugh, I think, was reflecting that zeitgeist on the right at the time. And, of course, that led into compassionate conservatism, which was also a much better than what we ultimately have. I would also say I think my biggest criticism of Limbaugh is not the negative impact he had, although he certainly had a negative impact. It's more the sins of omission. Like, Limbaugh didn't do anything to stop what was happening, including the rise of Donald Trump. I wrote a piece in 2015 at the Daily Beast imploring Rush Limbaugh to, as I said, quote, smother Donald Trump before he got too big for any of us to stop. And I reasoned that Rush Limbaugh was really the only person on the right who had the juice to stand up to Trump at that moment. You know, Bill, as you know, there was a time when William F. Buckley could basically write somebody out of the conservative movement, like the Ayn Rand or the John Birchers. But Buckley controlled the means of production. I mean, you couldn't just start a podcast. You couldn't just start a Twitter feed. Fox News didn't exist. Talk radio really wasn't a thing at that time, certainly not for conservatives. So it was harder for Limbaugh. I think in 2015, if anybody could have stopped Trump, it would have been Rush. I don't know if he reasoned that he couldn't stop Trump and trying and failing would demonstrate his impotence, or if he just didn't want to stop Trump because he liked him. But whatever the case, my biggest criticism of Limbaugh, of Rush, is really not what he did so much as what he didn't do. Because the Rush that I grew up listening to, you know, was the person that should have stopped Trump.
So can you talk a little bit, and you and I have talked about it, and I think you've written about it, but for folks who haven't seen what you've said yet, I mean, your relationship with Rush, not a deep personal, friend relationship.
He's mentioned me on air maybe 5 times. I've never met him, never emailed him, never talked to him.
But you were.
But our relationship was, I felt like he was my friend, and I'm talking about 25 years ago. And if Rush Limbaugh had died 20 or 25 years ago, I'm not exaggerating when I say I would have felt like a member of my family had died.
So you listen to him every day?
Every day that I wasn't in school. Sometimes I would listen to him if I was off school or when I was going to college or whatever. I would listen to him sometimes. He's on for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and sometimes I would listen to him that whole time. He's in the background. Maybe I'm in the car driving somewhere or mowing the lawn or whatever. He's on, keeping me company. I'm a lonely person. I'm an only child. I didn't have a lot of game back then, as you might imagine. I certainly wasn't going out with Maureen Dowd to any dinners. So he was keeping me. And there's an intimacy in radio that I also don't think young people probably don't fully appreciate, that there's an intimacy of radio. So yes, I felt a bond with him. He had no idea who I was, probably. He mentioned me on the radio maybe 5 times.
So what changed for you?
What changed for me is that, so when I first started listening to Rush, like the first 15 years I listened to Rush, I made this calculation, which was, I agree with him, I like him, I trust him, and therefore I outsourced my opinion and my knowledge. If he said something happened, I took it as the gospel truth, that it happened the way he said it.
He wasn't just an entertainer telling funny jokes.
No, that was icing on the cake. It was the whole package. But then I started, I actually got involved in the conservative movement, and I started reading books about ideas and politics and philosophy, and I started knowing people and independently verifying things. And there were occasions, and really nothing scandalous. The interesting thing is it's not scandalous, but there were occasions where I would be in my capacity as a conservative journalist at an event, and the next day or later that same day, I would hear Rush describe what happened at that event. And he was basically telling millions of Americans who were not in the room that I was just in, he was framing what happened. And I started to see big discrepancies between the way it was a lot of embellishment, and it didn't comport with my lived reality, Bill. And so it made me start to question, like, well, has this been happening the whole time I've been looking? I'm like, has he been doing this every day? A little bit. And so that sort of made me start to question, like, the accuracy and what I've been learning. And then I started to also see, I think Rush got worse. Rush changed. It's not to say he didn't ever say controversial or mean things in the 90s. He certainly did. But it was different. Rush did change. He became darker. And like the Sandra Fluke thing, in my mind, was an example of Rush trying to be controversial as a means of garnering publicity and buzz. And I view that as harmful to the conservative movement. And, I started to see that he was playing into these perverse incentives. So, but it took me, it was the course of years that I kind of had, it wasn't really an epiphany so much as it was like, over time I started to open my eyes a little bit.
Now, I'm not a Russophile. It's not like I've listened to hours and hours of content and to know every plot point in his journey, but I do know that when he broke big in the Clinton years, he was speaking from a place of great confidence that he spoke for the majority of the country.
Absolutely.
And Clinton won the presidency, but with 43% of the vote, and only got reelected with 49%. So there always was this sense amongst Republicans that Clinton, snuck in there and wasn't really speaking for the country as a whole. And so all Republicans had to do was to, hold down the conservative fort, and they would have their day in the sun. You listen to some of Rush's final broadcasts after Trump's defeat. He's musing about secession.
Yeah.
In December. He is talking after 1/6 as connecting it to the violence of the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. This is a huge departure. Again, I mean, young people or people on the left may not believe me or want to, and but he really changed. And part of it is just that worldview. I mean, in the 1980s and 90s, he's young. He's not, at this point, he's probably not drug-addled. He's probably only on his third marriage, not his whatever.
His fourth.
He's young. He's fresh. We've just had, when Rush Limbaugh goes on the air in 1988, we've had 2 years of Reagan. 2 terms of Reagan, 8 years of Reagan. We're hitting into George H.W. Bush, and then you get the Gingrich Revolution in 94, where Gingrich dubs Rush the majority maker. So Republicans are ascendant at this moment when Rush comes on the scene, and he's reflecting Reagan's, I think, sunny optimism. And I think he really believes it at that point, that the wind is at our back, and over time, people change, and people become jaded and cynical and addicted and I think conspiratorial if you're not careful, apocalyptic. I think just the worldview of like believing that you're on the winning side versus believing that you're on the losing side. The interesting thing is, Reagan was actually an anomaly. I mean, conservatism before Reagan had generally been negative and pessimistic. And Reagan changed that, and I think Limbaugh coming on Reagan's heels reflected that positivity and that optimism, but maybe things just sort of returned to mean eventually and the pendulum swung back.
So what happens now? I remember when Howard Stern decamped from terrestrial radio to satellite, and a lot of radio executives thought this is our chance to own morning drive time. Howard Stern's been syndicated across the country, dominating that slot for so long. Now's a chance for someone else to step in. And of course, no single person stepped in. There is no singular dominant morning radio force for multiple reasons. Obviously one of the biggest being the technological changes, satellite, podcasting, internet, whatnot. So can anybody be the midday singular king of conservative talk going forward, or is this just destined to be a more diffuse marketplace where no one individual is going to determine conservative sensibilities going forward?
Never say never, but I think that it's not just Stern, it's the whole trend, right? I mean, Johnny Carson was the king of late night, and now you've got like 10 guys carving up, it's just so fragmented. My guess is that's the same case here. There's going to be major players and minor players. Not everyone's equal, of course, but I don't think you're going to have any one person to dominate talk radio or conservative talk radio to the degree that Rush did. It's hard for me to imagine that.
I mean, if Donald Trump took over Rush's time slot, he could probably hold the same audience. I'm not sure if anybody else could.
I think it'd be too hard work for Trump. Even though Trump loves to hear himself talk and loves attention, and I think he would run out of material and get tired eventually. That's 15 hours a week of talking, and I can't imagine Trump interviewing anybody, so he would just be doing monologue. I mean, he might be great. Tony Kornheiser used to have this shtick, tell this story, which I loved. Tony Kornheiser is a ESPN co-host of Pardon the Interruption, and he has I guess it's a podcast now, but for many years in the Washington D.C. area, he hosted like a sports radio show, and Kornheiser would always say like, someone will come up to me and say, how do I break into radio? Because you know what, I think I could do what you do. I think I could talk about sports. I know everything about it, and I think I could do it. And Kornheiser said, like, you know what? I bet you could too. I bet you on a Monday after an NFL weekend, you could come on and you'd have a great show on Monday. And I bet you your Tuesday show would be maybe even better than mine. Mm-hmm. Here's what I want to know. What's your Thursday show like? Mm-hmm. Because by then the adrenaline has, run down. Mm-hmm. And by then you don't have anything to talk about. Being a professional is having a Thursday show. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that Trump could consistently deliver that. And trying to do so actually we should encourage this, because I think trying to do so, he might have a good week, but I think it would get rough after that.
So that's not being talked about.
I'm also worried that our friend Robert Wright would become a big fan of it and start listening to it habitually.
Now you're just trying to provoke. Now you're just trying to cause trouble. Now, another thing that is coming up, which I don't know if anyone besides me is going to commemorate it. I have a column in the queue for the monthly, so I don't know if it'll go up today or tomorrow.
When you say it's in the queue, you mean that it's in the QAnon magazine, right?
Why more people don't put out Q magazine saying I'm Q? No, I'm Q. I'm Q. Who anyone could be Q. You could start your own Q magazine right now if you wanted to.
What if it's me, Bill?
What if
hiding in plain sight? Who would you ever suspect me?
Never.
Of being Q? Probably not, right?
Anyway, so tomorrow, Friday, February 19th, is the 12-year anniversary of the Rick Santelli Tea Party rant. So that was delivered, about 30 days after Barack Obama was inaugurated.
I bet you we could go to the files and pull out the weekend blog
probably
that you and I did talking about when Rick Santelli. We're now at a point where anything that happened in history we can go find it, a recording of.
That's right. And so just to give everyone the context here, is by this point in the Obama presidency, the Recovery Act had been signed into law. It was signed into law on the 17th. With almost no Republican votes. It happened fast, but not without controversy. Rush Limbaugh had already called it the porculus, and Obama had already given a pretty tough speech in defense of it at a House Democratic retreat. So there wasn't a kumbaya feeling around passage. And the day after he signed it, he proposed a $75 billion out of the bailout fund, out of TARP, to be used for mortgage relief. And then the day after that proposal, here comes Rick Santelli, CNBC personality, on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, talking about how government is helping people who drink the water and not those who carry the water. It was a blistering tirade, which got applause from the traders on the floor, as if they were speaking for Middle America. He even said at one point, do you guys want to pay for some guy's house with an extra bathroom who can't pay their mortgage, and got a whole round of booze. And then he says, we're gonna have a Chicago Tea Party. For all you capitalists come out because I'm organizing. Now, he never actually organized anything, but a whole bunch of other people had Tea Party rallies almost immediately. And
this was the beginning. This is right around the time where I lost the thread of conservatism, where I was like, what is going on? I don't get it. I don't get the impetus here. I'm not sure why we're freaking out to the degree we are.
But you weren't a fan of the Recovery Act, right?
No, I still am concerned about spending and all that. But it was the whole thing about showing up at like parties wearing tri-cornered hats and carrying muskets that I thought was really kind of weird.
But
you know what I mean?
And obviously the average person didn't do that, but a narrative of regular people rising up, angry about Democratic overreach, angry that their pockets are getting picked to help out the losers of the country. That narrative took pretty firm hold and fueled a huge Republican wave in 2010. There's a piece that I wrote for Real Clear Politics back on Monday about gerrymandering. And because Democrats always look at gerrymandering as the reason why they don't do well in the House. But the big gains that happened were in 2010 before redistricting. Yeah. They didn't lose the House because they were good at redistricting. The Republicans were able to redraw the lines because they won with the Tea Party wave.
2010 was an interesting year, too, in the sense that, as I recall, that's the year where you had like Christine O'Donnell and Sharon Angle.
That might have been 2012.
I think it was 2010. I could be wrong, but I will say this: I think 2010 is also the year you get Marco Rubio and Pat Toomey.
Yeah, I mean, so, you got a lot more at 2010 than what you lost.
Well, that was my thinking was that this Tea Party thing, it's bringing in, it's a wave for Republicans. It's bringing in rickety boats that are crashing. But it's also bringing in sturdy, craft. And people like Rubio, who at the time I thought was kind of a rock star. Again, that was 10 years ago. All
right, so Sharon Angle was 2010. You're right about that.
Okay, that means O'Donnell was 2010 as well.
You are correct. You are correct.
And Rubio and Toomey, right? So let's just use those four as demonstrative of my point about, the yin and the yang, right? I mean, there was reason to be concerned, but there was also reason for optimism.
Right. I mean, Republicans had, a few random nuts that gave away seats in the Senate that they probably could have won in such a good year. And that might have made Democrats feel, hey, not all is lost here. But obviously the overarching point was that Democrats got a lot passed. I mean, there's two different schools of thought here. One is that Democrats got so much passed that they overreached, and that stoked the backlash. The other is that Democrats didn't do enough. The what they delivered was insufficient and unsatisfying to people, and that fueled the backlash. But in any of whichever school of thought you take, what I think is relevant now is, number one, it's relevant that there's nothing like a Tea Party rant that has happened yet. Yeah. The political dynamics today are wholly different than 2009. Biden has a lot more unity behind him. There isn't a right-wing backlash forming toward his current agenda. The Republicans are fighting amongst themselves more than they're fighting Democrats. And so that's a positive.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Biden's not as scary to them as Obama. The fear that we were going to turn into Greece or something didn't materialize. So it's harder to cry wolf, or maybe sometimes there really is a wolf, but it's harder to stir up concern. Also, Trump, you're hypocrites if you complain about spending, because Trump was all for spending, wasn't concerned about the debt or deficits. So there's several, I think, factors at play, but all of it redounds to, I guess, to Biden's benefit.
Well, I think that's all true insofar as we're talking about a pandemic relief package that is narrowly focused on pandemic relief.
Yeah,
I think
which is the other point, right? It's much more. I don't want to say it's much more, but you can make a case that, like, this is not a stimulus. This is, government shut people down, and so we owe them support.
Well, I mean, the opening that Rush Limbaugh first identified in 2009 was that Democrats are packing in all sorts of agenda items into this one bill under the, what they would say, the guise of stimulus.
Is this the Cornhusker kickback? Remember that?
Well, that's later. I mean, that's part of Obamacare.
Right.
But the infrastructure, clean energy, anti-poverty programs, redistribution of wealth. They're saying this is about the short-term crisis, but this is their long-term agenda, which, had a whole lot of truth to that. I mean, Rahm Emanuel said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. They were trying to get as much done for their long-term agenda. Not that it had nothing to do with the short-term, but they were trying to get long-term stuff done in that. Biden's initial proposal, I think with the exception of minimum wage, is about the immediate crisis. And this is a point that Michael Grunwald made at Politico not too long ago. So long as he's in that place, there's a lot less openings for Republicans to work with. Now, you are starting to see the next steps of the agenda come out, and perhaps some additions to the relief package. There's talk about putting a child poverty program in the relief package. There is some talk. I don't know if infrastructure or immigration. Actually, there was some talk about public option getting slipped into the relief package called Medicare X that Tim Kaine and Michael Bennet are talking about. Whether these things survive in the final bill, I don't know. But Democrats are starting to get hungry for wins. And I mean, one hand, understandably, they know you don't get majorities forever. You might lose it in 2 years. You got to get done with it while you have the numbers. But the more that they reach, the more the Republicans might say, hey, wait a second. You don't have consensus for these planks. And if I can pull the same trick that Santelli pulled and say, just because you have the numbers, just because this thing polls well, superficially, I can still argue that you are picking the pockets of the middle to help with these interest groups, these constituencies. These things are politically advantageous for you. I don't think that means that Democrats, for that reason alone, should not do them, but they should be cognizant that backlashes can occur, especially when you Democrats have sort of partially internalized that the lesson of 2009 is, do more good, go bigger and bolder, help more people, and maybe maybe the broader you go, the harder it is to pick one group against the other.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
I think I think that has become the consensus. Revisionist history, that the only mistake Obama made was not spending more. You know what I mean? Soon enough. How or when did that become the default consensus?
Well, I think there are folks on the left that have been saying that from the get-go. Those voices were quieter, not as widely accepted. And I think there's been a sort of a building over time, particularly in the past month, as we're having this debate about what should be in this package. And you don't see, a lot of arguments get won, quote unquote, because nobody makes the counter argument. Right now, Biden doesn't want to make a counter argument that 2009 wasn't big enough because he wants a big bill. So why bother having the discussion?
Yeah, it's not in his interest to make that argument, even if he believes it.
But you should still think about the politics of it, if not necessarily change your policy, but at least change your strategy or fortify your strategy. And if Democrats think that just going big and bold solves all of their problems, the problem is you can't go universal on everything. You can go near universal on direct payments. That's, so long as you have the votes for it, that's not hard to do. You can't go universal on child poverty. Not everybody has an impoverished child. So once you start talking about programs that are designed for the poor, and you don't think about how am I going to sell this to people who are not poor, then you might make yourself very politically vulnerable. Not just that might hurt you in election day, you might not get your bill passed.
Let's start a grift. Let's start a stop the spending pack. Let's start a new tea party, a coffee party. I don't know.
Well, there was a coffee party. There was a coffee party in the Tea Party days.
I know they had a coffee party. It didn't work. What if I went on a rant right now that inspired my children to give us a standing ovation? That would be hard, probably. Is there a chance? Like, is this just waiting for an opportunist to step into?
I'm sure at some point Democrats are going to propose something that somebody on the right is going to take a big whack at. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow or the next week, but it stands to reason that someone's going to want to. You're already seeing people are proposing things in Congress. They're not being driven directly by the White House. There's definitely an appetite to see how far can we push the White House? How far can we push the system? And mind you, this doesn't even take into account what Joe Manchin might say about it, or Kirsten Sinema. You might have some inter-party friction about these things that hasn't fully materialized yet. But someone's going to say something or propose something that some Republican is going to say, aha, this is our moment. Let's seize on this and see what we can milk out of it. And maybe it takes 2, 3, 4 tries before they really strike gold on something. But there's I'm not a pessimist. I'm not saying Democrats are bound for defeat in the midterms, but it's never perfectly smooth sailing. Someone's going to find a weak spot somewhere, and
you would think. But I feel like Joe Biden is just sort of boring us to death, or boring us into complacency. Don't you think? Like our like receptors have been like overwhelmed by Trump for 4 years, so that like our outrage receptors are so like insensitive now that like Biden just like does and says stuff and we don't even like, it just lulls us to sleep. So he could pretty much do what he wants, and it's hard to be outraged by it.
Well, it certainly helps him that Trump continues to be an irritant and is actively, fomenting civil war amongst Republicans. So long as there is more outrage and train wrecks going on the Republican side of the fence, Democrats can kind of, amble along without people paying too close attention to what they're doing.
Yeah.
But
like my last, today I wrote about Rush Limbaugh. Then I had the previous 2 columns I wrote were about impeachment. I was on a roll where I was sort of, dinging Biden and the Biden administration. I had a piece hitting them for their, not opening the schools up. And I was starting to finally get in this, I'm going to be the conservative columnist who, I'm not saying unfairly attacks Biden just to do it, but kind of holds them accountable a little bit. And then you had impeachment dominate the news. So that's good for Biden.
Yeah.
Not that he cared what Matt Lewis says, but I'm saying, I'm representing a larger trend.
No, I think that's correct. But I don't think you bank your legislative strategy on Republicans shooting themselves in the foot constantly over the next 2 years. They could stop doing that at some point when they find you've given them enough of an opening to...
Now who's being naive, Kevin? I hate to say this, Bill, but I have a lot of snow to shovel. And my kids are on hour 7 of the Switch. And I may be getting divorced. So I'm dealing with a lot of stuff.
You take care of business. Good luck. Good luck with video game withdrawal. And I will talk to you. Will we DM Zoom tomorrow?
I think we should.
Okay.
We should.
So I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you guys.
All right. Bye-bye.